says nothing here about being able to beat them. Says nothing here about being able to force them because they're foreigners to work against their will. All it says is that you cannot treat them like a slave. And all we've read so far is that someone who is working for someone else or a slave could be charged interest, and they could be not charged interest. Right. Didn't read anything about beating and not beating. Okay, so that's why it's important to read.
Right, Jill, just give me a minute, Jill. I'm going to mute you just so get a sentence. Yeah, back to the point.
Let's keep going. All right. At the same time as
children, and Jill, I'm gonna stop you shortly just because you're just basically preaching on my channel, and
well, I'm trying to get to what Leviticus actually teaches, and you don't want that to happen. I understand.
No, you can do, and I already know, but it's just
all right. We're there. Look, Leviticus. There it is. There's your verse.
Right.
So if there's a transaction, is that proof that the transaction is one of force? Purchasing means that you're paying.
No,
you're paying. You're making a transaction. Is there any indication, a hint, that is a forced transaction?
No.
But atheists just made it up. That's the point. They just made it up. They assumed that because they saw the word purchase and because they saw the word property, that it must have been forced. But in the ancient times, you could sell yourself as property to someone else in order to pay off a debt, in order to live in that person's household. You would work as a servant. This has nothing to do with slavery. That's the weird part about this. This has to do with economic stability as a nation. That's why I had you read the first 40 verses to get that context, to get that what the author is talking about. Financial stability, financial responsibility amongst your own people. Suppose a foreigner or temporary resident becomes rich. This destroys your entire argument, Wildheart. If these were slaves, how did they become rich? Game over. So it's time to go to bed now, Wildheart. It's time for this argument to go to bed. Because the same foreigner who supposedly was kidnapped, raped, and sold into slavery and beaten, that's the narrative you possess, is now rich. So this is what it takes in order to learn what the Bible is communicating. This is what it takes. I'm sorry. So if you're still with me, I'm going to keep reading because it gets even better. For me, it gets worse for you. Suppose a foreigner or temporary resident becomes rich. How can that possibly happen, Wildheart? Now it's time for cross-examination. Now that we've read the actual Bible, now you need to explain, Wildheart, if these foreigners have been kidnapped, forced to work without pay, which is a violation of Jeremiah. I could show you that, which is a violation of scripture. You were to pay your workers. Biblically, you must pay them. Even the foreigners, they get paid too. Okay, so Wildheart, if your story is true about Leviticus, and these workers were being kidnapped and stolen from other nations, how did they become rich while living among the Israelites? Wildheart, you there? The attention span, you have the attention span of a 5th grade emotional support student. Wildheart, you there? Ladies and gentlemen, this is usually how these conversations go. So next time we'll see him repeat the same false narrative. I'm going to encourage him to play back this interaction. Not only does he become rich, but he is now purchasing Israelites with the money that he made from being purchased. Bum, bum, ba, bum. Game over, bro.
So
you don't get that from me, because I don't argue slavery is moral.
Yeah.
So that's not a Christian apologetics. I don't know who you're getting that from, but you were way off as far as what the Bible teaches about slavery.
So if you go into another country, buy slaves from the heathen around you, which it tells you can do in the Bible, and then you can own them for life and pass them on to your children and beat them as long as they don't die within a day or two. And these were all laws created by God, given to Moses, on how you should treat your slaves. You're saying that God doesn't condone slavery? No.
Can we take a look at Leviticus 25 to get an idea of what's actually going on there?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I'm going to pull up Leviticus 25. All right, we're going to read it together.
This is so
slowly.
So many times.
No, you haven't done this before. You have never done this before. All right, you have never done this before. You didn't have anyone to help. Okay, but I'm here to help. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. All right, I want to try to find one that doesn't have all of these advertisements, because I don't want you promoting someone else's product. Most of these pills,
as long as it's on YouTube, they can't have a go at me for showing their own habits. Sure. I don't know.
Okay. All right, I like this Blue Letter Bible version better. All right, so they're promoting these pills. I know atheists love pills. They think that's the cure to all of their problems, is to pop a pill. So I didn't want that promoted on your channel. So then you have a lot of atheists watching, and I don't want anyone dying on my watch.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I appreciate it.
All right. So I'm going to change this to a more contemporary version. Okay. To help with the language. Okay.
Yeah. Just before you start, can you just say hello to Glenn? Good to see you.
Hey, Glenn. All right. When you're reading the Bible, you should always start at the very beginning to get the prologue, the context. What is the author trying to communicate? Okay. So these are instructions given to the people of Israel. Remember, Israel is in a war. So when you're in war, the rules are different on how you engage with others. Okay. So this is more akin to what you would read in Geneva, which deals with the rules of engagement when our countries go to war. We have rules on how we handle other countries, how we handle other people from other countries, foreigners, when they come to our territory. Okay, we don't shoot them dead. Okay, we have rules for how we treat them and what they can do, what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so that's the concept.
We put them into captivity and make them.
We do. Yes.
Made them
put them into internment camps. We call them internment camps.
And beat them.
We don't beat them. We're not going to read that here. Okay, this is Leviticus 25.
Yeah, no.
Exodus.
Is Exodus 21.
Right.
If you want to start from the beginning.
Okay. So
slavery. No, if you want to go to Exodus, we'll go through the lot of it. It's Exodus 21, the first one.
Well, hold on. Remember, each text that you pulled together, and you tried to piecemeal together an argument, but each of those texts has its own separate context. Okay, so you can't piecemeal. So you can't take Exodus.
Which was the first one?
Hold on.
That created laws down to slavery. It was Exodus.
Hold on. We'll get to that.
Let's start at the beginning.
All right, that's what we're doing. But what I'm trying to do is Okay, but what I'm trying to do is develop some sort of baseline for how you read the Bible in general. Because if you don't have that, you're going to make the same mistakes over and over again. Okay,
Right.
you cannot take Exodus and try to combine it with Leviticus and create a narrative that you can beat them. You get them from other nations, that comes from Leviticus. You can beat them, that comes from Exodus. Okay, you're piecemealing together an argument when each of those those scriptures you're trying to put together to create a narrative has its own context. So that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
Now,
So we
you
should go
mentioned
through
the
them
people.
all. So to be fair, we should go through them all in
Right.
context from the very beginning.
Exactly.
So if you kindly start at Exodus 21.
Okay, so this is Exodus 21. This is the part of your story, the beginning, where people are being taken from other nations, right? Because they have to be taken from other nations.
This is still Leviticus. We can go back to Exodus 21.
No. Exodus is when they're being beaten. You started your narrative by saying
it doesn't
you
matter.
started your narrative.
I'm saying, what does the Bible say about slavery?
If
you're going to go through what the Bible says about slavery, then you should start from the beginning.
We're going to start from the beginning, Wildheart. Logically, Wildheart, listen, Wildheart. Logically speaking, you have to get the slaves before you can beat them. So your story about slavery in the Bible began with the slaves being taken, correct?
Right. So
we're going to look at that context.
So now we're going to look at how the Bible treats slavery, starting
with how
in the middle with very specific verses which you prefer.
How they're taken is the first step.
And that doesn't matter as to the early ones or the later ones.
So he doesn't want to do that. You don't want to do this exercise.
This suits your argument better.
You don't want to do this exercise for a reason.
Yeah, I'll go through Leviticus. I'll go through all this. I'm just saying, let's start at Exodus.
You don't start with Exodus because Exodus doesn't explain how the slave got there in the beginning. You started your narrative with the slave being taken from other nations. So let's start there.
Which is first in the Bible, Exodus or Leviticus?
It doesn't matter. The laws are the laws.
If we're going to start from the beginning, which book?
That's not how it works.
Which considers slavery.
That's not how it works. Leviticus are laws.
Leviticus.
That's not how it works. The Bible is not in chronological order, Wildheart. The Bible is not in chronological order. Common sense dictates that you start with how the slave is obtained in the first place, and then how the slave is treated once he is obtained.
So you're going to explain these laws, which were written later, to
no, they were not written later.
Laws that were written earlier.
They were not written later. They were all written about the same time. It's just the order you see them in the Bible is not necessarily the order that they were created. But you started your narrative, Wildheart. This is what you're not getting, with the slaves being taken from other nations. So let's start with the Bible, where it talks about how and why the people are being taken from other nations. Are they being forced to come from other nations, or are they coming voluntarily? That's where I would start.
Yeah.
Logically speaking, that's where I would start.
I've missed you, Joe.
Okay, so now let's read. Now, these are instructions given to the people of Israel. As I mentioned, I gave you the context. The context is war. Okay, these are soldiers primarily. Okay, so you have to observe the Sabbath. Okay, is anyone being forced here to keep the Sabbath?
Right, let's read it.
The land itself must observe the Sabbath rest before the Lord every 7th year.
Right, if I can start from the beginning of Leviticus.
Right.
Give the following instructions to the people of Israel. When you have entered the land I am giving you, the land itself must observe a Sabbath, not before the Lord every 7th year.
Okay, so now it talks about you may plant your fields and prune your vineyards for 6 years. So these are laws concerning those individuals who are living in the land, or the people of Israel, and this is how they are to behave once they get into the land that he's giving to them. Okay, so it talks about the Sabbath. Don't store away crops that grow on their owned, or gather grapes from your.
Right, I've just removed Jill. I'll let you back in just 1 second. I just wanted to point out that I started with, gathering slaves from the heathen around you. Where is that? Because you said you'd chosen this part because it addresses what I said. Where is the actual part of the Bible where it says you can gather your slaves from the heathen around you? I think it's Exodus. I don't think it's this.
Yeah. So you don't want to read context. That's part of your biblical illiteracy. We're reading the context.
Jill, shush. The reason you gave for citing these particular verses is that it addressed the problem I had when I said that you shall gather the slaves.
Yeah, we'll get there. We'll get there.
That's in Exodus. That's in Exodus.
No, it's not in Exodus. It's in Leviticus. We'll get there. We will get there. Be patient, my guy. See, part of reading the Bible is being patient, taking your time, understanding what the author is communicating, not rushing through and going through IHateTheBible.com to find some mishmash garbage, combining Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, combining all of these passages and trying to create a false narrative. Okay, actually, so I'm going to speed through this because I want to get to the verse that you cited out of context. But I'm going to speed through this. Okay, your livestock. So this is all dealing with livestock. This is dealing with the feast. These are set upon Holy Land, Jubilee. So these are all laws. Okay, you may buy land from your neighbor. Okay, is anyone being forced to buy the land or to sell the land here?
When you buy land from your neighbor.
When you make an agreement with your neighbor to buy, sell, or sell property, you must not take advantage of each other. Is anyone being forced here to buy property or sell property?
I don't know where this gets into slavery.
We'll get there. We're trying to develop a baseline. Okay. In psychology, we do this. We develop a baseline for what the author is intending to communicate. So we don't make straw man arguments.
Right.
Okay. So these are all voluntary actions, transactions, selling property.
When it says property, are they talking about buildings or humans?
This is talking about land, property. Yes.
Right. So nothing to do with slavery.
Okay. Right. What are we developing? We're developing a baseline. What is the author communicating? Is he talking about voluntary transactions, or is he referring to any transactions that are involuntary?
When you buy land,
so far, these are all voluntary transactions, right?
When you buy land from your neighbor,
you must pay.
No, that's nothing to do. There could be separate rules from buying.
We're developing context.
Jill, shush. There could be separate. Jill, there could be separate rules if you buy land from your neighbor. There could be separate rules from that and buying slaves.
We'll get there. We'll get there.
Your neighbor.
We'll see. We'll see.
So this bit doesn't matter.
We will see.
Land, not people.
We shall see. Let's keep reading. This is good. This is good. All right. So these are all voluntary transactions, correct?
More years.
So they're setting the price. So someone is paying. You must pay. You cannot get them for free. You cannot get this land for free. You cannot steal it.
Right. So we're still talking about land. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. And why? Why should you obey and pay people for the land, not just steal it from them? Because you shall not take advantage of each other. I am the Lord your God. All right. Yeah. Let's keep going. If you want to live securely in the land, follow my decrees and obey my regulations. Okay. All right. Then your land will yield crops. Okay, so let's keep going because we're just speeding through this to get the author's
Yeah.
intention. What is he communicating? What is he trying to communicate?
Yeah,
Right.
I'm just
If
trying
the-
to get to the bit where it talks about actual owning humans as property, slaves, and not
Yeah, we'll get there.
property,
We'll get there.
not property, because
So-
they they are related. You could have two
Mhm.
different rules for property and for humans.
Yeah, sure. We'll see about
So-
that. We'll
so-
see about.
So talking about all the rules about property doesn't really matter.
We'll see. We'll get there. We'll get there and see if you're right. If your hypothesis is right. Sounds to me is that you're just guessing and you haven't read. Okay. With every purchase of the land, you must grant the seller the right to buy it back. Okay. So even if you purchase it, the seller has the right to buy it back.
Yeah.
Okay. If one of your fellow Israelites falls into poverty and is forced to sell some land or some family land, then a close relative should buy it back for him. Okay. Nothing wrong there. No one being forced there. Okay.
Yeah.
If there is a close relative to buy the land, can't afford to buy it back. So these are all, if anyone sells a house,
laws
they have the
about
right to buy it back after a full year. Okay.
perfect.
Right. Houses,
All laws about
Levites, the Levites
houses.
always have the right to buy back their house. Okay.
Yeah.
These
Perfect.
are all voluntary. Anyone here being forced so far?
No, that's fine.
No,
All
houses. Yeah.
all laws about land, property, and houses. Yeah. So
Okay.
getting back to the slavery.
Let's get. We'll get there. We'll get there. Context is king, not what your Bible, your evil Bible.com says, but the actual Bible. All right. If one of your fellow Israelites falls into poverty and cannot support himself, support him as you would a foreigner or a temporary resident and allow him to live with you. We're getting closer to what the author is communicating. Can you read that again for me?
Yes. If one of your fellow Israelites falls into poverty and cannot support himself, supports him as you would a foreigner, as a temporary resident, and so can you zoom in a bit?
Okay. So this is only if a fellow Israelite.
Yeah,
okay?
but
So
as we all know, there were different rules between Israelite slaves and
and you get a hint. Yeah, you get a hint of what those rules were. If you were not an Israelite, you could be charged interest, and we can make a profit off of you. I still practice that today. If you're a Christian, I will loan you the money. I will give you the money, no interest. No, you don't even have to pay me back. If you're not a Christian, I will charge you interest. I will become a loan shark. So I still practice this today. So yes, there were different rules for foreigners.
That seems very moral.
We're learning something. There were different rules for foreigners.
I'll charge you interest depending on which religion you believe. That's very, very moral of you.
That's very, very biblical of me. Yes, I follow the Bible. I do. I really do. Okay. All right. So yes, there were differences. Now, what your ilk will say is that one of those differences is that someone can be forced to be a slave if they were a foreigner. You will never be able to prove that from the text, and I'm going to prove that. Okay.
Cool.
But there were differences. There were rules. There were advantages to being a citizen. Of course there are. In every country, there is an advantage to being a citizen of that country, which is why you seek citizenship. All right, so let's keep going. I don't want to. Let's keep going. I don't want to bog you down with that point.
Interesting. Yeah. Cool.
Okay. All right. So, I'm the Lord thy God. Okay. If one of your fellow Israelites falls into poverty, is forced to sell him slave to you, do not treat him like a slave. Okay. Now, this is key.
Do not treat him like a slave.
This is key because we just read in the context what treating someone like a slave was. It was charging them interest. It was making a profit off of them, which you were not to do if that individual was a fellow Israelite. Says nothing here about being able to beat them. Says nothing here about being able to force them. because they're foreigners to work against their will. All it says is that you cannot treat them like a slave. And all we've read so far is that someone who is working for someone else or a slave could be charged interest, and they could be not charged interest.
Right.
Didn't read anything about beating and not beating. Okay, so that's why it's important to read context.
Jill, just give me a minute, Jill. Okay. I'm going to mute you just so I can get a sentence in. Right, we've been going through this for a while now, and I'll let it continue, but can we just address the points that I disagree with rather than you just reading the whole Bible? Do you know what I mean? It's tedious at this point.
It takes this type of study to get to what the author is communicating. Otherwise, you're being lazy.
Did you actually ever stop talking while
you're being lazy, Wildheart? It takes this type of dedication. It's almost done. All right, there are only about 50 verses. We're already at the 39th verse. Okay,
50. Fucking hell. Long-winded fucking asshole God. Do you know what I mean? Just make some rules. It doesn't have. You're fucking God, for fuck's sake. You know, sauce it ain't. Should be simpler than this.
All right. Well, let's keep going. Treat him instead as a hired worker or as a temporary resident who lives with you, and he will only serve you to the year of Jubilee. So those who were Israelites, they can only serve until the year of Jubilee. If you are a non-Israelite, you could be a slave for life. Okay, so that was another advantage to being an Israelite.
That's the whole point I was trying to get to.
You're not making any point, but that there were advantages to being a citizenship. You did not have that advantage. Now, what you would need to prove is that the Israelites were forcing the foreigners to be slaves for life. Not that. The rule was you could not do that to an Israelite. You could not, even if they wanted to be a slave for life, you could not make them a slave for life because it was seen as to be beneath the God of the Bible to have his people under another. That's all.
Yeah.
Okay, that's not forcing the other to be slaves for life. So you're conflating. You're taking the fact that America says to be an American you must speak English. Okay, that doesn't mean that we beat people with a whip who come to here and force them to speak English. You see the difference?
Yeah. Okay. If we can get back to the point.
Let's keep going. All right. At the same time as
children, Jill, I'm gonna stop you shortly just because you're just basically preaching on my channel, and
well, I'm trying to get to what Leviticus actually teaches, and you don't want that to happen. I understand.
No, you can do, and I already know, but it's just.
All right, we're there. Look, Leviticus, there it is. There's your verse.
Right.
Okay. All right. The people of Israel are my servants, who I brought out of the land of, so they must never be sold as slaves.
The people of Israel are my servants, whom I bought out of the land of Egypt. Right. So is that God? Is that God admitting to being basically a slave trader?
No, he freed them. So in the antebellum, whom I brought out of the land of Egypt, he freed them from the Egyptians. They were slaves in Egypt. He freed them.
Yeah, the people of Israel are my servants, whom I brought out of the land of Egypt.
Right,
so
they were slaves in Egypt.
So they must never be sold as slaves, but they're going to be God's servants.
Exactly, right. So these are his people.
So that's not an argument. That's not an argument against slavery. It's saying that you shall be a slave to God, but you won't be able
my
to be sold
servants.
to anyone else.
Yeah.
So
God has already
slavery.
explained. This is why it's important to read context, Wildheart. God has already explained that everything belongs to him. So it doesn't, so you're all my slaves. So that's God's attitude towards everything. Okay,
So,
because it all belongs to him.
That
Right?
ends the
So,
argument.
but we're
Jill, just
we're not concerned about what God.
No, that ends the argument there.
No, it does not. Let me explain how really quickly.
God is pro-slavery so long as he is the slave owner.
So you're not listening to what the actual author is saying.
That's what
the author is not talking about how God treats us. God treats us like vessels. The Bible teaches that. He does with us what he wants to do with us because he owns everything. The Bible is talking about how you should treat your fellow human. That's the argument you're trying to
Israelites.
You're trying to possess.
Israelites aren't all humans. No,
yes,
this is
all humans. Yes, that's what we're trying to get to, but you're fighting against the context.
Humans.
Why are you fighting reading context, my guy? Why are you fighting against reading context? Because you don't want to know what the Bible actually says on this.
No, it's because you got to read the whole Bible and pick out the bits.
You don't have to read the whole Bible. We only read a few verses. And you're complaining, crying like a third grader who has to read, write a 5-paragraph essay.
All right, just get on with it. Yeah.
I mean, all right. So the point I'm trying to make here is that God can treat us however he wants to treat us. What he is telling us is that we cannot treat each other a certain way. Your claim is the Bible promotes slavery. Slavery has to do with how we treat each other, not how God sees us or treats us. Okay, so don't get distracted and say, well, God says that we're slaves, therefore the Bible is for slavery. God says that, yeah, we are his slaves. He does with us whatever he wants, but you're not going to mistreat one of my servants. You're not going to mistreat something that I created in my image because you're not me. That's
right.
Okay.
So going back to where it says you shall buy the slaves from the heathen around you.
We're there. We are finally here. Okay. So God says they must never be sold as slaves, but remember, there's still no indication whether or not the selling, even in this case, is being sold by force. I could say to my children, you will never work for sanitation. Never. Because I see working as sanitation as beneath my legacy. I have my own legacy as a man, as a leader, and I don't want my children or my wife hanging around bars and clubs. So you must never be sold as a bartender. Okay? There's no indication here that bartenders is a industry in which people are forced to bartend or to hand out liquor. Okay. So this is why God is saying, I don't want you to be slaves, because he is saying that you represent me. And because you represent me, you are not subject to another. Okay. That's the context. So now let's get to your verse 44. You may purchase male and female slaves from among the nations around you. Is there any indication in there that and in the context that these purchased slaves from the other nations are being purchased by force? Did we read anything in the context or anything up until this point that would indicate such?
How could they not be by force?
Okay, so we have to assume.
If you're charging someone who owns someone,
so you have to assume.
You're paying them so they can become your slave rather than. How is that not by force?
So you have to assume force. That's the point. That's what we do When we read the Bible, we don't assume anything. We let the Bible say what it intends to say. If there's no indication that people are being forced to come and work, then we don't force that into the text.
You may also purchase the
Mhm.
children of temporary residents.
Mm-hmm.
Who
Okay.
live in
Any
the
indication here of of them being
purchase.
forced? Okay.
Purchase.
All right. Any indication here that now these are temporary residents who live with the Israelites.
Yeah.
Did it say anything about them being put in chains and forced to be temporary residents?
Yeah, I
Hmm?
presume that. But again, we're not getting
Wildheart,
back to the original question, which is
right?
Exodus 21.
Does it say anything about the children or the
Jill,
residents being forced to be
Jill,
there? They live among you.
Jill, do you know the passage which says you can take slaves from the heathens when you.
This is the passage, Leviticus 25:44. We just
Is it?
read it.
Is
Yeah.
it?
However, you may purchase male and female slaves from the nations around you. Is there
Yeah.
any indication in these two verses that anyone is being forced to live with the
Yeah.
Israelites? So the residents, the foreigners, are already living among the Israelites. Where did they come from? How did they get there? Did they come from other nations voluntarily to live with the Israelites, or were they taken and forced to come from other nations? Does the text say? So if there's a transaction, is that proof that the transaction is one of force? Purchasing means that you're paying.
No,
You're making a transaction.
it's one
Is
of
there
those.
is there any indication, a hint that that is a forced transaction?
No.
No. They assumed that because they saw the word purchase and because they saw the word property, that it must have been forced. But in the ancient times, you could sell yourself as property to someone else in order to pay off a debt, in order to live in that person's household. You would work as a servant. You would do the dishes. You would, if you were a male, you would do more of the harsh labor. Okay. And all God is saying is that my people should never be in that lowly position of working under someone. If you see your fellow Israelite in that situation, you go purchase them and you bring them into your household because they are your brother. So just as though if I had, let's say I had 6 brothers, I would go purchase if 20 people were poor, I would only bring my brothers in first. If I have enough money to bring them all in, I would. But first, I would only bring in my brothers and I would purchase them and bring them into my household before I purchased a foreigner or before I let a foreigner purchase them. Because the idea is that if you're a Hebrew, Hebrews stick together. Hebrews support each other. And the Jewish people still have this attitude today. That's why they're so successful financially, economically. When they see one of their Jewish brothers in trouble, they don't allow the government to beat them up and take them and put them in jail and put them in the system. They combine forces and they take care of their own. That's all God is communicating here. This has nothing to do with slavery. That's the weird part about this. This has to do with an economic stability as a nation. That's why I had you read the first 40 verses to get that context, to get that what the author is talking about. Financial stability, financial responsibility amongst your own people. You may treat them as your property, but you may not treat a fellow Israel as your property. You bring them in and you bring them in as a brother, right? You don't charge them. You don't charge them interest. So that's not slavery. That's rules. Being an Israelite. There was an advantage to being an Israelite. So if you came to Israel as a servant, it would be in your best interest to become an Israelite, to become a citizen, so that you would inherit all of these advantages. Someone who refused to become an Israelite, they don't get the same advantages. Right? So let's keep going, because it gets even clearer as you keep reading. It's even clearer than this. Okay. Passing, you may treat them as property. Okay. So if you were property, if you were a non-Israelite, you could be passed on to the next generation as a permanent inheritance. If you were not an Israelite, you could not, or if you were an Israelite, you could not pass them down. Anything here about anyone being forced to be in these contracts? No. There's just different rules for Israelites. You must never treat your Israelites. You can never make your Israelite or hire your Israelite to be your slave for life. Okay. Are you still with me, Wildheart? Or did you go to sleep? Suppose a foreigner. Now, remember, the foreigner is treated, he's given harsh labor. So he's given the harder work to do, because he's not an Israelite. He doesn't get that perk. He did not want to become a citizen. He doesn't get that perk. So he's doing the harsh labor. He is also charged interest. He can be charged interest. So he isn't making as much money as he would if he would become a citizen. Okay. He can be sold, or he can be made a slave for life. Okay. So that's the foreigner. The Israelite has advantages, the foreigner does not. So far, that's what we've learned. No one is being forced here. Okay. These are residents, people who are living in Israel. No one's being forced to live in Israel. They came to Israel. That's why they're called temporary residents. Okay. Not slaves. The Bible does not promote slavery, or what we call slavery. Okay. Promotes a different type of slavery, one where that involved people volunteering to work, and an economy of work. So this is not an economy of technology. Like we have a technological economy where everything is working, everything is based off of technology, computers, iPhones, etc. Their economy was based on work. So if you wanted to do something, if you wanted to get ahead in life, you would work. If you wanted to live in a certain part of the world or a certain land, you would enter that land and you would work for one of those landowners, for either residence there in that land, or you were saving to move on to the next land and ultimately to your ultimate destination. These were migrant workers. These were actual migrant workers, not the people that Joe Biden has crossing the border. Okay. These are people who came from other nations, who worked for those nations that they traveled to. Very simple. If you would take the time to actually read Clockwork Rex, whatever your name is, actually read Red Fang. You graduated high school. If you would take the time to actually read what the Bible says, as we just did here, the truth puts atheists to sleep, which is why Wildheart is left his own stream. The truth also shames atheists. He should be ashamed for believing what he believed for so long. This is why I don't trust atheists, because they hold on to error for so long, even when after they're shown that it's an error, because their pride won't allow them to admit that they were wrong. And also, having the God of the Bible support slavery makes you, as a white liberal, look better, because my ancestors certainly were guilty of this. So therefore, if the God of the Bible did it, then I'm not so bad, right? So that's why you will see people like Sandy, you'll see people like Matt Dillahunty, you'll see people like Clockwork Rex, Reg Fang, Wildheart. You'll see them saying, "See, look, slavery, slavery," because perhaps in their subconscious, they're trying to diminish what their ancestors did to Africans hundreds of years ago. They're trying to minimize that. And if we can make the God of the Bible condone slavery, or promote slavery, I should say, he does allow slavery. He still allows it today for some reason. But if we can get the God of the Bible to prescribe it, we somehow are better, morally speaking, than the God of the Bible, because we only had slavery for 400 years. Shut the hell up, liberal. But what will happen, what I predict will happen, is you'll come back with this argument on Talk's channel next week with this contrived lie that someone put together for you on evilbible.com. So, Wildheart, I'm not going to leave until my question is answered, and you or you kick me. If the slave, the foreigner, the temporary resident was forced to be a slave, which means he didn't get paid, which means he was probably beaten, didn't have any rights, how did that foreigner become rich in Leviticus 25:47? And then after he becomes rich, he starts purchasing Israelites. Now, interestingly enough, this ties into what the rest of the passage is teaching on being a slave and how God doesn't want his people to be in that position. Really, a slave here is someone who is borrowing. You can think of a slave traditionally in our culture, we would say that that's a borrower. So God doesn't want us to be borrowing. He wants us to be lenders. Look at this. If any of your fellow Israelites fall into poverty, again, this is speaking of economic. This is what Trump is trying to do for America, bringing back economic stability to our country and not being reliant on other countries. So in God's economy, the Israelites were not to be financially relied upon, because God knows where that leads. Anyone with sense knows, any leader of a country knows what happens when you become financially dependent upon another. They start telling you what to do. Right? So if any of your fellow Israelites, and God didn't want heathens telling his people, controlling his people in that fashion. When you have financial control over someone, they are essentially your slave. Okay, that is a truism, that is a fact of life. It's always been that way. The borrower is slave to the lender. The Bible literally says that. I'm quoting scripture. The borrower is a slave to the lender. Does that mean that the person was forced to borrow the money? No. Obviously, the word slave is being used differently here. You could use the word slave differently. The slave doesn't always have to mean one thing, especially when you're reading a book thousands of years older than you. If any of your fellow Israelites fall into poverty and are forced to sell themselves to such a foreigner, what do you mean he's forced? Well, he's forced financially. He's not being forced by physical force. He is selling himself to a foreigner. This was the same foreigner that was supposedly a slave and forced to work and not paid and beaten. Now he's buying up Israelites. But God says no. They retain the right to be bought back. So in their culture, they had what's called kinsman's redeemers. They had men, Israelites, who would go purchase other Israelites from foreigners because God did not want his people working under foreigners, people who don't worship God. He did not want them under their authority. He did not want them to be slaves to them financially and thus economically, and thus they would be working for them, physically doing work for them. He didn't want them to be under their thumb. He wanted the Israelites to be the ones who were loaning the money to the foreigners. Isn't that the case today? You need a loan, you go to a Jewish person. All right. So they retain. So when we're reading Leviticus, we have to read context. You must read context. Otherwise, you'll fail in reading. Okay. And we don't like, God doesn't like failures. I don't even think God likes secularists to fail all the time. He wants you to be successful in something, because that's a better world. That's a better world for us. If at least you could read. Wildheart. They still retain the right to be bought back. Even after they've been purchased, they may be bought back by a brother. So God is saying, if you see your fellow brother working for a heathen, go purchase him from the heathen. God did not want his people working underneath heathens because it was seemed beneath the God of the Bible. The God of the Bible's ego is as big as all of the egos combined. Financially, a financial slave is someone who is in debt to another. He does not want that. It's not a good look, basically. All right. So they may be bought back by a brother, an Israelite, an uncle or a cousin, someone who's related to you. Okay. In fact, anyone, God is saying, look, get them out of the hands of a heathen. I don't care if the heathen is rich. I don't care if he came to Israel and made a lot of money being a slave and now he's purchasing other slaves. Go buy them back because I don't want my people underneath them. They have fake gods. They have their gods don't exist, right? And I don't want you working for them because that makes me look bad. I'm obviously paraphrasing, but this is exactly the idea. Okay, they may also be redeemed if they have prospered. They may redeem themselves. So if they have prospered in their position, even though they're working for a heathen, if they've made a lot of money, buy yourself from under that situation. Not because anyone's being forced. I have to keep going back there. Because when it's the Israelite doing it to the foreigner, all of a sudden somebody's being forced. But where are you getting that from? Your hatred of the Israelite people? Your anti-Semitism, perhaps? Why is it that when the Israelite purchases foreigners, he's practicing enslavement? He's enslaving them. But when the foreigner is purchasing Israelites, it's not forced. So this is why I call Dr. Josh an anti-Semite. When he was reading Leviticus 25 and try to trick people into thinking that the Israelites are here doing something nefarious. It's disgusting. They will negotiate a price of their freedom. Okay? So you negotiated a price. Again, no one is being forced here. Okay. The foreigner must treat them as hired workers on a yearly basis. You must not allow any of your fellow Israelites to be treated harshly. Again, we know what that means. They're not to do the hard labor. Even if you were to interpret it as hard labor is still not forced labor. Hard labor, harsh labor is still not forced labor. If any Israelites have not been bought back by the time of Jubilee arrives, they must be set free. For the people of Israel belong to me. They are my servants. I purchased them from the land of Egypt. I am their God. See how God is his ego. These are my people. They don't work for anyone but me. If you want to work for them, you can work for them. That's the gist. That's the communication. That's what Leviticus 25 teaches. That's why you start at verse 1. There is no rebuttal to what I said. There's no rebuttal in the chat. There's no rebuttal from liberal scholarship. There's no rebuttal from Dan McClellan, Dr. Josh Hammurabi. There is no rebuttal for what you just heard. I'm going to scroll down to the passage that you ignored, well, verse 44, but you ignore verse 47. So I'm going to keep it right there and see how long Wildheart plays this game. But the God of the Bible says, no. You have to redeem the Israelite, because it was seemed, even though it was seemed as sort of a lowly position, especially if you're Yahweh and you are holy. So your people don't work for anyone. You're the head and not the tail. That's for all Christians. Stop borrowing money from the bank. People should be coming to you to borrow money. You're supposed to be the head and not the tail. There's nothing to do with your race, by the way. Just be financially responsible, as the Bible teaches, and you won't be an Edomite in this sense, okay? You won't be an Edomite. So this slavery challenge goes for everyone, including ETT. The Bible does not promote or sanction, I'll say, slavery. Wait a minute, whose channel are we on?